All right. Well, good morning. I appreciate everybody coming in this morning. This is a good turnout. My name is Derek Bridges. I work for the Ohio Department of Administrative Services. I lead the state's data analytics program, as well as various and sundry others, identity, digital experience, and a bunch of other things in that portfolio. But right now, a great deal of our time and focus is on data analytics. So we wanted to talk a little bit this morning about how this program came about and kind of what we're doing with analytics within the context of government, because it is a little bit of a different animal. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges that we started with in data analytics, what we're doing to address those challenges, what we have done to address them, and then talk about some of the sample results or example results from some of the projects that have been done. And the whole key here is, not research for the sake of doing research, but applied analytics. So how do we very quickly, this is something that our governor has been very passionate about in Ohio, using data and using technology to try to affect better outcomes in the public space. And the administration has been very supportive and has really made it a priority for us to try to break through some of the traditional constraints and get to quick value to affect better outcomes. So just by way of quick background, this is a maturity model, and I'm sure you guys have seen dozens of different versions of this, but it's all basically the same thing. We, like most organizations, started down on the left-hand side with the traditional BI practice that I and the team were a part of. And through the success of that BI program, we kind of grew up around enterprise-level data sets. And as we ran out of enterprise-level data sets and agencies kept coming to us saying, hey, I really need to integrate my agency data, not enterprise-level data, but specific to my agency, specific to my program. I need to integrate this stuff. It very quickly became apparent we were going to become a bottleneck in this, right? Because it was traditional physical warehousing with traditional BI tools, very IT heavy, and we weren't going to be able to keep up with people's demands. So over the last 4 or 5 years, we pivoted pretty quickly and have really been ramping up over the last 4 years or so in terms of federating our analytic capabilities. So doing that while keeping some sort of balance, some sort of law and order. Because interestingly enough, when I came to the state a few years back and we were standing up the BI program, everything was just Wild West. And so we spent all this time, effort, and energy trying to get things consolidated, get governance, get law and order. And then we hit these constraints and we go, oops, okay, now we need to figure out a way to put the tools into the hands of data people and business people and expand and scale this thing, but not lose complete control. So that's been a lot of our challenge. And obviously, Tableau has been a tool that's been in the middle of that, as I'm sure it is for a lot of your organizations, as you move to a more federated or decentralized model. As we've done that, we've begun also to progress well past the operational regulatory compliance reporting into these analytical insights. And typically speaking, what we're looking for when we talk about analytical exploratory projects, we're looking for how do we solve a public problem using data and how do we do it somewhere south of 6 to 9 months. So fast is kind of the order of the day. And this is for a number of reasons, but a lot of it is, let's be real about what we're solving for. In Ohio, we obviously, like a lot of states, have a problem with opioid dependency. We have a very high and always increasing infant mortality rate, so that's babies that don't make it to their first birthday. So time's a factor. And that's what we've been challenged to do, is break through these silos, move quickly, and get to analytical insights. Now, interestingly, it's a big culture change for a lot of agencies within the state. To get past slow, methodical research where everything has to be perfect, all of your record matching across these different sources and systems has to be perfect. It's a culture change to get, to move toward more of a fuzzy match, more of an analytical model. But that's what we've been doing. So along those lines, we really ran into, we saw it coming, 3 basic challenges to data analytics. One is silos. And this is not unique to government, but it's very, very pervasive in government. And that is, I can't share my data with you because you work for a different organization, right? Even though we see the value of it, both of our organizations say, hey, it would be great if we could do this. Imagine what we could do for the public. Doesn't matter. In some cases, it's because of laws. In some cases, it's because of federal oversight. In some cases, it's just bogus, right? It's just people that there's some sort of folk law that has people saying, well, we can't share data. So, in a lot of cases, though, the barriers are real. So we'll hit on that. Expertise. I don't know about most of your organizations, but we are not overwhelmed by people who have a big data background in state government. The market's tight. Those people are in high demand. And I'd say salary constraints being what they are in the public sector, it's difficult to attract and retain this talent. Additionally, our traditional procurement approach in government is long, laborious, tedious. It doesn't lend itself to quick results. And it also, generally speaking, has a lot of barriers to entry and a high cost of doing business, which means some of our smaller niche firms that we want to get to don't really even respond to public procurements because it's just too expensive to even get qualified to do it. So we had to try to address that. And then finally, technology. We spent years having IT vendors of every shape and form come in and push their tools, and it's kind of magic tonic, right? They come in, they push their tools. If only you just buy this tool, all your problems go away, right? All of the slow data modeling and the governance and on and on and on, that just disappears, right? So, wrong. But that's what we were dealing with. And we see a lot of other organizations that get themselves hemmed into a specific technology and then can't grow and adapt. They're not flexible. So that was the third challenge that we've been addressing. So we'll hit on that. First, the silos. So in going after the data silos, we took a very direct approach out of the gate, which was very simply to change the law. So if the law prohibits you from sharing data, then we'll just change the law. What we did was amended Ohio Revised Code to put in a elegantly simple phrase that just says, notwithstanding any other law to the contrary. Do you guys know what notwithstanding means for folks that have been around any legalese? That says basically, no matter what any other law on the book says, this law prevails. So, notwithstanding any other law to the contrary, state programs can share data. That was obviously a big move, but certainly not the end of the battle because, as we said, there are a lot of things that aren't state laws that prohibit data sharing, right? Most notably, federal regulations, federal oversight, and we have no authority to override or supersede what the feds say. So we removed the state obstacle in one shot with this revised code, but there's still a lot of work for state agencies, legal counsel, and everyone to, interpret that the way they need to and figure out exactly how that's going to work for them. But that was a big first step. Within that section of revised code, it also directed the Department of Administrative Services, which is us, to create a data sharing protocol and create a data analytics program. And this data sharing protocol is basically the rules of the road, so to speak, for how state agencies are going to share data. It outlines roles and responsibilities, security and privacy considerations, data ownership, et cetera, in a very general sense, understanding that every program is different. And we have a lot of these conversations with state agencies where they come in and they're like, well, we know you have this basic data sharing protocol, but you don't understand these restrictions I have, these restrictions I have, these. And our answer to that is, you are absolutely right, we don't. You're the expert on that, not us. But what we're starting with is a basic framework, and then we can go in and work with individual programs to amend or add addenda or whatever they need to do to these data sharing agreements under the data sharing protocol. So, having said that, it doesn't get us out of legal paperwork, it doesn't get us out of all those things, it just adds a little more order to it so that we're not making it up on the fly every time we do it. but all of the data sharing agreements, terms and conditions, responsibilities, all those things are very real, and we still do. Again, it doesn't eliminate those obstacles. It's an attempt to expedite it. Expertise. So we talked about that expertise challenge and how we go about addressing that. We really didn't set out to try to build a state workforce that has expertise in all these areas. There is the technical side of just all the big data tooling, all the ancillary tooling around it, your visualization tools, and so on and so forth. But there is more than just that. There's the subject matter expertise, the people who are actually the data science SMEs who work in specific domains. So what we did is we chopped the state up, so to speak, into 14 functional domains. And these pretty much were our best cut at here's how we would divide up state government if pressed. And we released an RFP that was effectively a pre-qualification RFP. And what this did was it allows vendors to come in, get through our basic terms and conditions, and pre-qualify in each of these domains, and effectively expedite the procurement process. So in doing this, we got about 70 vendors. We had many more show up, but we pre-qualified 70 vendors across these 14 domains. And what happens from there, and some vendors showed up, some of the larger vendors showed up and qualified across all 14. Some of the smaller ones were very specialized. We had institutions of higher education, we had hospitals, we had all types of other research and analytics outfits that showed up and qualified in specific domains. So once they're in that pool, then instead of having to go through the long, arduous process of a full-blown procurement, when we have an analytic problem that we want to solve, we can write a 15-page statement of work that basically says, here's the problem I want to solve, here's the data that I have, and some of the key questions I want answered, and release it, have a quicker turnaround time on the response back, and keep this from costing each of the firms 50 grand a pop to try to respond to public procurement. We got a really good mix of some of the larger firms that traditionally do business with the state, as well as a lot of new faces. So there were 50-something odd firms, I think, out of the 70 that were first-time state vendors that have joined this pool. So that's an exciting thing. That was an effective way to go after some of those niche players. So when we do this, so how do we launch a project? We have a support team. The changing the law is great, creating the new contractual vehicle is great, but folks need a support team to be able to do this. And so we assembled a team of about a dozen people of varying skill sets, some of them more technical, some of them business analysts, PMs, et cetera, and effectively what we're doing is from ideation through project execution, we support these agencies. So we'll get, a problem gets thrown out on the table through various means. Either it'll come down from up top or it arises out of some other group or whatever the case may be, but somebody says, here's an opportunity for analytics to solve a problem. And so we'll pull the agencies together. Okay, who all has data that could contribute to this? And we start just getting everybody on board. That's generally a little bit of lead time. That's usually the toughest part, is convincing people of the value of this, why we need to do it, that you are allowed to do it, getting over those legal hurdles. Then assembling the team, figuring out who are going to be the sponsoring agencies, what resources they're going to have to put up, so on and so forth. Assembling data, and as we're taking inventory of the data, we are in parallel writing this statement of work that's getting ready to go out through the RFP from the last slide. So we do that, we release the RFP, we get responses back, and we execute the project. Now, generally speaking, the firms that come in and do this work are data science people. And so when they come in and they see a Hadoop distribution and all these big data tools and these kinds of things, more often than not, we found, regardless of the firm, that they need technical support. And so that's another leg of what this team, what our centralized team does, is provide the technical support to the consolidated team. When I say consolidated team, this is basically what we're talking about. Every time we start one of these initiatives, each initiative has its own governance. There is representation from the business side and representation from the technology side, generally at the assistant or deputy director level, CIO level for the IT side. And we pull this multidisciplinary team together, integrate the third-party analytics firm that's coming in to provide their expertise and their data scientists, and create this collaborative team. Then this governance persists on through the course of the project until we get to the end of the first round of analytics. The point here is that these things are designed to be iterative, right? Any kind of, there's a lot of derivative research, right? So you don't want to ask the same question over and over, build on what other people have already answered, right? So the idea here is to do short bursts of analytical exercises and build on what you've done. So this structure, this governance, this collaborative team stays together through the course of this. In some cases, we've seen it be a one and done. They just do, hey, I have one kind of point in time question to answer. In other cases, it's iterative. We do 6 months, answer the questions, then reassess and say, okay, now where can we go from here? Do we want to introduce more data sets? So on and so forth. But the one thing common to all this is that we want actionable insights. We want to do something with this. We're not in this to publish research. We're in this to actually make changes to programs and affect outcomes. So that applied analytics is a big theme here. Technology-wise, so from a technology standpoint, it's a cloud era distribution. For those of you who are familiar with the big data players, it's a fairly new thing for the state, and it's really allowed us to do a lot of things that the state couldn't previously do with traditional relational databases. And we've had there's a lot of education that goes into this, and we spend a lot of time preparing participating agencies for how this is all going to work. Because if you look at this, we've got, and there's a whole slew of tools down the left-hand side that we use for data ingestion, data prep, things like that. There's a cloud era distribution in the middle. For visual analytics, we support them with an enterprise-wide Tableau service and provide them a lot of other tooling. Obviously, this is all new, every bit of this. Tableau's the piece that's been around for the longest for us, probably 4 years-ish. But the rest of this is less than 2 years old. And so, agencies have a lot of questions. And we have to spend a lot of time with their IT people, with their security people, and any other interested parties to make sure that they understand what is this, how does it work. We take them through all of the controls, audit capabilities, how they can trace data lineage end to end from the source through the ingestion up into the Tableau visualizations. And we've created a lot of training and education around those things. But that's generally a fairly involved task when you're talking about, these agencies are releasing data protected under HIPAA, FERPA, CGIS, IRS 1075. You name the restrictive regulation, and it's in there. So we're talking to these these agencies take these things very seriously. These programs are very serious about safeguarding the security and privacy of usually the individuals within these data sets. So we have to go through a lot of that and then teach them to then use it. And what we're not expecting agencies, the average state employee, to come out of the gate and start playing hands-on with big data tools immediately, right? This is why we bring in our support team. This is why we bring the third-party expertise. But they have to know enough about it to feel comfortable with it and to maintain a sense of ownership of their data. And if you remember on the data sharing protocol slide earlier, data ownership is a big concept. And this is something that's very different and that has kind of differentiated our approach to this from what we've seen in a lot of other places. In a lot of other places, it's been bring all your data to us, we'll churn it, and we'll give you the answer that you require. And I don't believe that scales, number one. And number two, it leaves agencies, I think, a little bit disconnected from the process. And I'm not sure that our ultimately our customers in that case have as much trust in the results, right? So it was important for us to ensure that from point A to point Z, that agencies, that the data owners retain ownership all the way along, all along the way. So we've put a lot of catalog and data management and those kinds of tools in place to give them the visibility that they need. And it was a challenge early on when folks didn't know how to use the tools. We know these people, they trust us, but it's still difficult to say, you're the data owner, but you as the data owner don't really have the ability to go in and check your own audit logs and don't have the expertise to go in and see and move and touch your data. That's, I can say that. I can say, yeah, you own it all the way and we won't do anything without you. All the access granting comes from you, et cetera, et cetera. But unless they can go into the tools and do it, it's lacking something, right? So we've spent a lot of time, a lot of our early training beyond just the what is data analytics, what is big data, how does all this fit together from the data prep all the way out to the visualization of outcomes. In addition to just that basic kind of education, it's really been trying to empower users to give them a sense of ownership, that effectively what we're doing is we're giving them an analytics platform and the expertise, the support, the capabilities to go and do this. But it's incredibly important that they maintain that sense of ownership. I'm not going to belabor this one, but this is something obviously that we spend a great deal of time talking to agencies about before we start partnering on these things. And this is basically what I would just consider defense in depth. There are layers and layers and layers from perimeter security at the data center all the way down to logical security in, be it Cloudera, in Tableau, or wherever else the data flows through this. So this is something certainly that we spend a lot of time working on. Simple way to put it is this. When we bring in an outside party, so we've got this platform, right? And this thing is locked down. We've got our chief information security officer who has put his representatives on this to ensure this meets all the standards that we need. This thing it's a vault. But people still have to get to it. So we set up edge nodes around this where folks can come and VPN in. And this is an important concept because that quarantined edge node access point for whoever the party is makes them feel a lot better about data going in, data coming out, what people are seeing, what people are doing, touching the platform. Additionally, for the third-party vendors that come in and do work with us, one of the important concepts that we had here was being tool agnostic. So we've got a lot of tools here that people can use. But our stance was, if you've built a better mousetrap, then let's use your mousetrap. So the problem with that, obviously, is intellectual property. We didn't want to get stuck, as I mentioned earlier, wed to a specific tool. So if we have an analytical problem that we want to solve, and we go out to the street, and let's just say vendor ABC or XYZ comes back and says, hey, I have this proprietary tooling that we've already created for another purpose, another engagement, what have you, and I can deploy this and we can do our thing with it. Well, I don't really want to get into having to buy a solution that we're then stuck with and that we don't own and that provides us no flexibility for future iterations, right? Because as I said, this is an iterative thing. And what if I want to bring another party into the picture? What if I want another organization to collaborate? So for us, being Ohio, what if I've got a for-profit vendor that comes in, puts in their proprietary tool, and I decide, next round we want Ohio State to take a look at it? Whoops. Right? Now we've got intellectual property sitting there, and we're going to get into a thing where we either have to buy it or so on and so forth. So what we've done here is create this edge node concept where people can come in and drop their tools. It's quarantined, they can do the work they need to do, and we don't get necessarily locked into it. They can feel safe installing their tooling, their intellectual property, without it being available to other people. De-identification. I'm not going to drain this one because we could frankly talk about this for the remainder of the time. But obviously a very important concept to our user base is, is how do we protect the security and privacy of individuals who are represented in these data sets. So there are a number of ways, a number of technical approaches that we go about doing this, but suffice to say, most of the major projects that we've done that have married up any data with personal health, financial information, we've had to run through some de-identification protocols. And it's not a one-size-fits-all thing by any stretch. We have a series of protocols that we'll invoke depending on the situation. In some cases, it's just simple obfuscation. We tokenize, or if we need to truly anonymize, as in under the GDPR definition of anonymization, then you're basically talking about aggregating to the point where it's irrevocable anonymization. We have not to date released any of these anonymized data sets to the public because frankly, the very discussion of doing so tends to drive people away from the table. So when we're trying to get agencies to collaborate, we in fact have to even be careful about talking de-identification. Because the concept gets thrown around a lot and it gets thrown around a little haphazardly, we've had a number of instances where you bring up de-identification and all of a sudden people just recoil and say, no, I'm not buying the de-identification thing because someone could re-identify it and so on and so forth. We have to go through and remind them, understand, we're just doing this as another layer of security. So to give you an example, for the infant mortality project, which we'll talk about momentarily, we de-identified 30-something odd data sets and maintained integrity across them. So basically obfuscated the personal information, anything identifiable about the individual. It's not to the point that I would release it to the public, but we did it on its way into the project zone, and when we dropped it into the project zone, everything was de-identified. So literally you're talking about 3-4 people on the planet have access to this data, and we de-identified it before even they could hit it, right? So the idea there is, it's when you have the protocols in place to do these basic tokenization, aggregation routines, whatever it is you want to do, it's worth doing them just to provide that extra layer of defense and that extra layer of assurance to agencies that are very sensitive about their protected data. So a lot of cases, in most cases where we have sensitive data, we're running these routines before we even drop it in and allow project teams to access it. So we talked about what the service is. This is just the really high-level view of it. Really consists of 5 components. And the first 2 are kind of interrelated, but it's the platform that I showed you is a hybrid platform. So, we obviously wanted to drive toward analytics in the cloud. I think a number of us recognized very early on that convincing agencies to release their data into the public cloud was just going to be one more obstacle. And so what we said was, hey, if what we're trying to do is speed, then saying cloud is your only option isn't going to work. So what we've got is a hybrid cloud on-prem distribution. If you want to run your workload in the cloud, you can do that. If you want to run it on-prem, you can do that as well. So this allows us to flex a little bit. The data analytics support services, that's basically our team. So be it technology, security and privacy, strategy, all the ideation, procurement support, et cetera. Pre-qualified analytics firm, that picture of the circle dividing the state into the 14 domains, that's what this is, right? So this gives us the expedited procurement vehicle to go out and get these expert firms and bring them in. And then finally, visual analytics. Can anybody take a wild guess at what that is? Steve Cohen, can you take a wild guess at what that is? There you go. There you go. So we do have an enterprise Tableau server and that we offer to agencies as a service. There's been, I think we've got 30-something odd agencies on it. Most of our large state agencies have sites set up and are in varying levels of progression through this. What we found, a lot of them are using it just for visual analytics for any purpose. But what we found is I believe without exception, of the 7, 8, whatever truly data analytics projects that we've done, and mind you, this is 7 or 8 opportunities that we've pursued, and we've never had the same vendor win twice, which is a good thing, right? So we're getting a lot of participation. It's not the same old faces. We're getting new folks in. And every single one of them, when we get to, okay, so how are we going to visualize the outcome for executives and so on and so forth, every single one of them has said, well, you guys have Tableau, right? And yep. So, all right, that's what we use. So it's pretty much the go-to tool for visual analytics within the program. Around that, this is about, we also need to focus on enabling agencies. So from data sourcing, how do we do ingestion, discovery, and data prep? There's a lot of tooling in here. I'm not going to get into what all those things are. But what I will say is we've spent a lot of time evaluating the needs of our customers and figuring out what's out there in the market, what's the best set of tooling to support them. So data sharing, the lineage, governance, and audit. Obviously, I think in most organizations, data lineage, governance, and audit those are just huge. They're must-haves. And I think lineage, typically when we're showing people the tools, lineage gets the most oohs and ahs out of when you show the big, lineage picture that is too overwhelming to follow. That's where everybody goes, ooh, that's great. And then understanding, so visual analytics and enhanced data science, we've got a lot of tooling around that. So how do we prep people for that tooling? Obviously, none of you are being offered, well, I don't know if there's some state of Ohio folks in the audience, so those folks can go to this training. But really the point here is just to say that we do provide pretty comprehensive training around all of this tooling on 2 different tracks, that of the data owner and that of the analyst or developer. It basically starts with a rudimentary 101, what is all this, why are we here? And progresses up to more of an applied 301, now let's get started and actually start playing with your data. Additionally, we have a wealth of web-based and other online training opportunities for folks that are the result of, the state's got education, continuing education deals with outside firms. We've got third-party avenues. So there are a lot of other avenues that we allow or that we present people for training. So, what's it mean to in real life? So, infant mortality in Ohio has been we're frankly, unfortunately, among the worst in the nation as far as our infant mortality rate. So, that's a lot of babies that don't make it to their first birthday for a variety of reasons, and our the administration challenged us to figure out why. And more than just why, what can we do about it? What are the buttons we can push, levers we can pull that can help these babies reach their first birthday? So we got together in this case 4 agencies, the Ohio Department of Health, the Department of Medicaid, Mental Health and Addiction Services, and Jobs and Family Services, and started looking at the data sets that would be necessary to get a comprehensive picture of what are the clinical determinants, what are the socioeconomic determinants, what are the other indicators that suggest or lead to infant mortality. And what we found was ended up being somewhere in the neighborhood of about 35 data sets across those agencies that have never previously met each other, which is to say the state's never had an opportunity to join this stuff up, either because of the silo challenges, because of the expertise challenges, or because of the technology challenges that we hit on earlier. They didn't have the tools, the expertise, or the ability to break down the silos, or any of the above. It really depends. In fact, we found within one of these agencies, and this was the remarkable thing to me when I was talking to the governor's office about, so here's what we've done, here's what we've married up, and I said, before we even get to results, it's remarkable in its own right that we've managed after, the state's been around since 1803, if memory serves me right, and these data sets have never been joined up. I said, that in and of itself is fairly remarkable. And one of the agency's directors laughed and said, that's actually even worse. 10 of the data sets just within our agency have never been joined up. And that just speaks to the divides between programs. It's not just between agencies, it's between programs. So we got this data together and we wanted to look at these key questions. Basically what this comes down to is what can we do to prevent infant deaths? And we wanted to approach this a slightly different way. You know, I talked earlier about random acts of research or research for the sake of research. We're not trying to get published here. We're trying to change things. We're trying to save lives. So moving beyond the exploratory and academic. This requires a great deal of flexibility, and this is where some of that culture shift. We had a lot of discussions around, you know, some of these agencies coming into it saying, hey, we have, you know, we need to do perfect data matching, this kind of thing. And there was a lot of discussion around, well, it doesn't really have to be perfect. The fuzzy matching is good. It's got to be perfect enough to fit the model to figure out what interventions are going to be effective. So that model, this is a just kind of very basic high-level picture of what was created. And the cool thing here was this was, and I think that agencies, you know, maybe were skeptical about how long it would take. I think this whole thing took us a few months to do the matching logic across these data sets, to the point where we can now trace a mother and her interactions across social programs, spanning all these different agencies on a timeline, right? So she's tokenized, nobody knows who she is, only the program that needs that information can get to it. So basically within this black box, you have this ID XE8CR, blah, 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 that has touches with the Department of Health. And I apologize, there was an updated version of this that didn't have our state acronyms in it, but ODH is the Ohio Department of Health, Medicaid's Medicaid, Job and Family Services is JFS, MHAS is Mental Health and Addiction Services, so apologies for the outdated slide. But nevertheless, you get the idea, right? So these people are touching these different services. And one of the, we found a lot in this 6-month analytical pursuit. And you know, among them we found there was the highly protective nature of the WIC program. So WIC, which provides nutritional assistance to women, infants, children. And what we found were big gaps substantial gaps in enrollment. So we found lots of mothers who qualified for and were enrolled at one time or another in Medicaid or in food stamp programs, but were not on WIC. So we found these cross-enrollment opportunities that agencies are now pursuing, back to the applied analytics. We found a lot of other indicators, some of them just risk indicators, some of them causal. But long and short of it is the result of this 360 view is an analytical model, or a set of analytical models that tells us effectively who the most at-risk population, who are the most at-risk populations. And for those who can get down to that level of grain, at an individual level, who are the at-risk mothers to be. So then what do we do with it? So the 4 agencies right now, this is the exciting part. This is what makes this, frankly, exciting to be a part of and worth doing, is this next step. So the second we got these results back, and actually as the results were rolling in through the course of this project, the participating agencies were looking at these insights and saying, okay, what do we do to change this? So now we've got these models that are telling us, here are the leading indicators, and we've got the prescriptive models that tell us, if I tweak this, what happens? If I tweak that, what happens? And hopefully that will be leading us to more informed policies, more effective policies, and better collaboration between programs. But we already have, as of June of this year, or July of this year, the 4 agencies were already starting to go down the path of some of the targeted interventions that we're talking about here. They're largely being piloted in in Ohio's 3 most populous cities, which, not surprisingly, also have some of the highest rates of infant mortality. So, this is where the rubber meets the road. And the point here is 6 months of analytics, and we're making changes. May not be perfect, but the point is not to be perfect. The point is not to know with 100% certainty, right? If we believe that turning this knob can save 50 babies, if I'm wrong and it's 30, so be it. Turn the knob, right? So that's the idea. Quick shot of, there are a lot. This is just the one screenshot. I'm not going to get into the details here for the sake of time, but there are a number of outputs that are delivered as part of these efforts. And generally speaking, Tableau is the visual analytics tool of choice. Frankly, there was a little bit of sensitivity. I would have loved to show you a lot more of what it is that came out of this. But as I said, there's a lot of sensitivity around the data, and we have to be cognizant of that. But, we saw a lot of things around. There's a great dashboard that I love that shows in-home providers, right? So one of the questions, when we look at that previous slide, so what are the targeted interventions? What are the things we can do? Well, one of the first questions you have to answer is, well, who has contact with these mothers and with these families? Who's in a position to be able to do something with it? And so the Department of Health has these in-home care providers that find themselves in direct contact with mothers-to-be. And we saw some really stark things where, there's this one picture where it's a long list of things that we can talk about with an expecting mother, right? Smoking cessation, safe sleep habits, so on and so forth, nutrition. Just, you think about all the things that a mother-to-be should be thinking about or is thinking about. It's a long list. And what we saw was a lot of these providers were really just talking about the same things over and over without regard to the individual, right? So they didn't necessarily target it at, hey, I know, I see some risk indicators here. I should spend a little more time talking to you about this topic or that topic. It wasn't very personalized. And so these are the types of things when we get these visual pictures, it gives us a really, really vivid image of what can be done to change outcomes. So beyond that, we have a number of other analytical pursuits that are in flight at the moment. There is, as I mentioned at the beginning, Ohio, like a lot of places, is very affected by the opioid epidemic. And so we are, at present, we're in the early stages, not far enough along that I have anything that is cleared to share, but we're looking at opioid dependency and with particular regard to how it works within the criminal justice system, because we're seeing in Ohio's criminal justice system a high level of admission for people who are self-reporting or otherwise reporting opioid dependency on the way in. And there's really the eye-opening picture for me was just our Department of Rehab and Corrections shared with us a graph that just showed over time, so as people are coming into the correctional system and reporting dependency on something, anything, right? It shows basically the crack cocaine family goes down, and opioid and heroin just shoots right up off the chart. So there's this cross where opioids are obviously becoming a huge problem, and that's certainly the case within criminal justice. So you have recidivism problems, you have a lot of issues. Are these people getting the treatment they need while they're within the system, outside of the system? And then how does this apply across, outside of criminal justice? So that one, I expect to start seeing some, publishable, so to speak, results coming back within the coming few months. And the interesting thing there, and this is the exciting thing for the, for the data and techie people among us, is just the approaches to each of these things. We're looking for a similar kind of 360-degree view of an individual, but in this case, in the opioid case, we're using a lot more machine learning and AI capabilities, whereas in the previous case, in infant mortality, we had a much better picture to start with, and so some basic just fuzzy matching logic, a basic match algorithm was able to pull this together. In this opioid case, it's going to be a lot more ML/AI based. So other things that we're looking at, I touched on the opioid and public health. The Business 360, this is an interesting one. It doesn't have the winning of hearts and minds that some of the public health problems present, but it's a very real thing for agencies who are either in the business of regulating business entities or of supporting, incubating, and fostering economic development within the state. And effectively, what we're getting at is that picture that I showed you of a person, of the 360. It's the same thing for a business entity. And why would we use that? Well, because the state has, for instance, economic development functions. We actually have a private organization, a private corporation created by the state that, among other things, functions as a VC firm and injects capital into businesses. And as we got all these business-facing agencies together, it was a lot of the same refrain. They said, I want to make sure before I'm giving someone a venture capital investment or before I'm giving them a grant or whatever, I want to make sure they're not delinquent on their taxes. I want to make sure that they're in good standing with regard to unemployment, workers' compensation, et cetera, et cetera. So we're excited about that one. Fraud, fraud exists in a lot of places, and I would expand that to say fraud, waste, and abuse. We are very close to releasing a tax fraud statement of work that's going to look at really the behavioral economics aspect of tax compliance. So, simply put, is it more effective and efficient to convince you to pay your taxes or to chase you down if you don't? Right? So what we're trying to do is get to how do we encourage tax compliance instead of just chasing after delinquents. And there are others that are, some of them more grand, some of them, we're really encouraging agencies. I think, and this is worth mentioning, there's this notion that I see among state agencies, and I think it's because of the popularity and the hype around data analytics. There's this notion that you have to be either, splitting the atom, solving world hunger, things like that. And what we're trying to get across to folks is it doesn't have to be a groundbreaking problem. And this tooling that we have, as I said earlier, despite the magic elixir, magic tonic salespeople, not all of them, just some that have kind of left that in people's minds. Despite that, it doesn't make all the traditional problems go away. You still do have to have data governance, strong ownership. You do have to understand it. You have all the same challenges. We just have better tools or different tools and different approaches to go about it. And we're not trying to go into this, and this is a lot of what we spend time talking to agencies about, is we're not here to replace your data warehouse. That's not what this is. Right? What we're trying to do is, if the challenge here is to very quickly reach analytical insights, simply put, your data warehouse isn't the best way to do it. And so that's really what we're focusing on, and getting these organizations to change the culture and get comfortable with that very quick time to insight and understand that, perfection isn't necessarily the goal. You work toward it. It's iterative. You don't have to get it perfectly right in the first iteration. So with that, just taking it back to the three challenges, the silos, every organization's got them, government certainly. And, I think the big thing for our organization, and we learned this as we went, right? We came in very excited to say, hey, guys, we passed this awesome law, and we've broken down these walls, and now we can share data. And, agencies were very quick to remind us, you broke down a wall. There are still several others. And you have to be careful, or we have to be careful, not to go in presuming too much. And you have to give, while we're breaking down silos, you do have to acknowledge the difficulty that these organizations have, be it state agencies, departments within organizations, what have you, the difficulties that they have sharing data and the very real concerns that they have, particularly around security and privacy. And it comes off, if you come in too aggressive with, hey, we've got all that licked, we can solve it, it comes off like you don't understand them, right? And our point is, I don't presume to understand you. You know your business, you know your customers, you know who you serve, not me, right? So it's important as we address those silos to make sure that the agencies are empowered and they are in, that we're in a supporting role and that our participating customers or organizations are the ones that are ensuring the removal of those silos. And sponsorship. From the top down, that is absolutely, it's a no-go without that. Because data sharing is one of those things. Who authorized this? Right? And everybody's going to take one step back and look around, right? Who authorized this? So someone has to take the stage and say, I did, it was me. So you need that sponsorship. The expertise was a big one. This stuff changes really, really fast from a technology standpoint, as I'm sure you're all aware. And we thought long and hard about this, and I continue to be challenged by it when annually when I work with our HR folks to review our workforce plan, and I get asked the question, are you going to build this competency in-house with state employees? And, some bits and pieces of it, yes. The program is, it's not a completely outsourced thing. We have to have that in-house competency. But the reality of it is, particularly in the technical areas, the tools move so fast that trying to build this competency in-house, particularly within a government organization, is a real challenge. And so we're really looking to rely on partnership with the analytics community, with all the other firms out there, and we're continuing to re-release that RFP, that pre-qualification process that I talked about. We do that we've been doing it every 6 to 9 months or so to get more folks into the pool. And then ultimately technology. Our biggest fear coming into this was being beholden to any one organization or any one technology. Because like I said, this is a really dynamic market and a really dynamic environment. So we didn't want to get stuck. So that said, we stood up a pretty agnostic, best of breed kind of platform, and we invite people who are doing analytics. If you want to use our tools, use our tools. If you want to bring your own tool, bring your own. And we always are listening to our customers about their challenges, issues that they have, capabilities that they're missing, and trying to stay strategically out ahead of that. So our team has a technology roadmap and a matrix of capabilities and needs that we are constantly updating, that's looking at, okay, what's the next big challenge that agencies are going to have? And we really, we looked at early on, well, we know that we're going to need a high degree of data management. If we fast forward this 3 years and we've got, 4 petabytes of the state's data all on board and all these agencies participating, there's a lot of data management that's going to be necessary for that. But that all costs money, and so we parked that on the roadmap, and we're not operating without data management, but we're getting the right pieces that we need when we need them. And that's a big part of the technology strategy around this, is constantly being in touch with our customers and trying to anticipate what it is they're going to want, what it is they're going to need, and when. Because the when's an important thing. I don't want, resources are scarce enough. I don't want to blow it all on shelfware because we're going to need it 3 years down the road. We'll wait until we get a little closer to that. But we have to be careful. It's a little bit of a, with some organizations, there's a little bit of a gotcha kind of element to this. And so I want to make sure that we don't go into discussions where someone says, oh, but what about a capability to whatever, fill in the blank, and we haven't planned for it, or we have it on the roadmap, but we haven't done it yet, and all of a sudden it's, aha, see, you've got a hole in the boat, this isn't going to work, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big thing for us, is to try to understand and anticipate our customers and our partners, participating agencies, and stay in sync, if not slightly ahead of their needs and their expectations. So with that, those are my closing thoughts on the matter. I really do appreciate everybody taking the time to come in and hear about what we're doing. I would imagine we've got a couple minutes here. We can open it for questions if anyone is so inclined. Yes?
Do you have any worry with the new administration coming in January?
Worry, no. I'm curious, absolutely. I think that, I mean, obviously it's going to be a new administration. But, you know, actually during one of our budget meetings about 5 months, 6 months ago, our state budget director asked me a similar question, like, should we let the next administration decide what we want to do with this? And I said, well, director, you know what, if the next governor doesn't care about data analytics, he or she will be 1 out of 50 that doesn't, because it's here, it's real, and it is a prevalent thing. So I think that under whatever name or however they want to craft or shape the mission, the objectives, the message, data analytics will be there. As far as what it means for me, I don't know. But you know, we hope that we've got enough of a foundation here that however folks want to brand it, however they want to pursue it from here, you know, the point here is to have a foundation that people can run with. So, yes?
Have any of the insights from the analytics driven change with budgets or allocations for programs?
So not quite yet, but as of January, or well, it's really being formulated now. So we're just going into our operating budget cycle at the moment, and the state of Ohio is a biennial, so every 2 years operating budget. So we didn't have any insights during the last cycle 2 years ago. So what we're going to see is, particularly with infant mortality, because those results are really starting to get put into pilot mode right now, I think going into, with a change in gubernatorial administration happening in the middle of a new operating budget cycle, absolutely. The four participating agencies are going to come in and say, look, here's what we've learned, here's how we want to allocate resources, and this is what we want to do. In some of our smaller initiatives, particularly those localized within one organization, they were done explicitly for the purpose, in some cases, of internal allocation of resources. So they're not doing it as part of the macro, like political budgeting process, but within a department, that resource allocation around programs, absolutely. Yes?
Do you have participation from the education, K-12 for higher ed?
Yes. Yeah. So they're actually in the infant mortality world, they were, as we got to the end of that first leg of analytics and said we're going to move into the next one has kind of two main components. One is the targeted interventions, going in and changing based on what we know, and the other angle is learning more. So bringing in additional cohorts, additional timelines, more data sets, and named among those data sets was the Ohio Department of Education. And the Department of Health and our team and the Department of Education have come together and begun to figure out how exactly that's going to work. But I will say our Department of Education, at least in the initial planning, has been very, not just open, but you know, enthusiastic about the idea. I think they see the opportunity there. But again, you know, education in terms of privacy around student data, family data, that kind of thing, there are certainly hurdles we're going to have to clear, but I think we'll clear them. Others? So the question for the room was, are the third-party vendors that come in and do these engagements the ones that are building the visualizations and the outputs? Thus far, so all of them have, right? So they all do build them, but they're not the only ones who build them. So there are, as I said, there are 30-something agencies that are using Tableau that I'm aware of, which is to say they have content on our enterprise Tableau server. Not all of them are doing data analytics, right? Some of them are just pointing to their localized data sets, pointing to other data sets, and building their visualizations for their organizations for their purposes. And in some cases, we have an increasing amount of public content that we're putting out there. So agencies have begun to see the value of taking visual analytics and embedding the viz in their websites, their application portals, whatever it may be, in order to better tell the story of what they're trying to do, who they're trying to serve, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say, kind of dual answer. Yes, everybody who's done an analytics engagement with us has used Tableau, but that's, in terms of total Tableau usage, it's very, very small percentage-wise, if for no other reason than because the results of these analytics projects tend to be sensitive to the point where they don't get a lot of not many people have access to it, right? So when you take our server activity and we have publicly available stuff that's out there, that just gets pounded on. And then you've got these incredibly valuable visualizations that are available to 3 people. They don't even show up as a blip. So, I'm sorry?
How many desktop users do you have?
How many desktop, Steve, how many desktop users do we have? So you asked if I would have a co-presenter. Yes, Steve is my co-presenter. Out of time. All right. If there are any other questions, I can walk out in the hall or whatever. But thank you again. Very much appreciated, everyone.